I was the first political secretary to a Malaysian prime minister from East Malaysia, Sabah or Sarawak.
What was it like working with Prime Minister Najib Razak and his cabinet?
You don't work only with Najib. I felt rather uncomfortable sometimes in such a racially and religiously charged environment. Najib himself, he's a very economics-oriented type of politician.
What does a political secretary to a prime minister actually do?
By definition, a political secretary will assist the prime minister in, shall we say, settling political scores, to put it more bluntly.
Around that time, 1MDB was just being set up. What was the original intention and vision of 1MDB?
Frankly speaking, the original intention was to supposedly, but along the way, I don't know, it became something else.
In 2018,
Yes.
the Barisan Nasional actually had a very big upset in Malaysia's general elections.
The 1MDB, shall we say, series of scandals, they were the catalyst for Malaysians to finally decide to change governments after nearly 6 decades.
If there was one advice you could give to Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim,
Sometimes you need to make hard choices and stick to them. You are either or.
do you see Malaysia and Singapore more as siblings or rivals?
Of course, we are.
Let's look at the bigger picture. Do you think ASEAN can truly remain neutral?
I frankly don't think ASEAN.
I'm Nicole Lee, and welcome to You Never Know, where we talk about life, career, finance, and health with visionary people who have taken the unconventional road and embraced the unknowns. If this episode resonates with you, I would love for you to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need it today. Are you ready? Let's go. Today's guest is an avid and outspoken political commentator known for his candid insights on Malaysia, China, the US, and the intricate ties that shape ASEAN's place in this changing world. From studying in California to working in the United Nations in Geneva, his global perspective unexpectedly prepared him for his role in Malaysian politics. In 2009, he became political secretary to then Malaysian Prime Minister Najib Razak, giving him a rare insider's view on how his country really operates. Today, he's the principal advisor at the Pacific Research Center of Malaysia, a senior fellow at the Singapore Institute of International Affairs, and a Justice of the Peace in Sabah, Malaysia. In today's episode, we're going to dive deeper into his insights from Malaysia's government to global affairs, the evolving relationship between Malaysia and Singapore, and what the future really holds for ASEAN amid rising China-US tensions. It is my absolute pleasure to welcome Isan Oh to You Never Know. Welcome to the show, Isan.
Well, thank you very much for having me on the show.
So, Isan, I'm going to cut to the chase and take us back to 16 years ago in 2009 when you were appointed political secretary to then Malaysian Prime Minister Najib Razak. So I'm curious, Isan, did you see it coming?
Well, a little bit. Ever since I went back to Malaysia in the early 2000s, I have been very, as you said, avid in terms of writing and commenting on Malaysian politics, and then by extension, regional politics. So by, I think, around 2008, when the Malaysian voters, they did not exactly change government, but they substantially reduced the parliamentary representation of the then government, I thought perhaps at some point I would be invited into the government because, well, instead of perhaps arresting me for my often very critical comments, they might want to co-opt me in order to, shall we say, strengthen their political hands in terms of appealing to the minority communities in Malaysia, namely mostly the Chinese, the Indians, and the East Malaysian natives. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a very smart move by the government. I think you were also the first East Malaysian, right?
Yes. I was the first political secretary to a Malaysian prime minister from the East Malaysia, Sabah or Sarawak.
But did you always wanted to be in Malaysian politics?
Not really, not really. I think when I first went back to Malaysia in the early 2000s, of course, like many who went overseas, especially I was studying in the United States, and I saw firsthand how what I would call true democracy or real democracy was being practiced. People were elected to their local governments, to their state governments, and of course federal governments, and so on. But in the Malaysian context, you often, well, at least at that time, you saw the same politicians, same batch of politicians coming back and forth. So of course we thought we could make a change. But of course, as I observe and I experience Malaysian politics more, I started to realize that, well, in the context of not only Malaysia, but many developing countries, very often, shall we say, food and money would come before your ideals, your ideology, and so on. And unless you're very rich, it's very difficult for you to really get involved in politics.
Was it easy or difficult for you to say yes to the role?
Well, I could recall, for example, there was a series of interview before I was appointed, and the last interview was with, well, none other than the man himself, the then Malaysian Prime Minister Najib Razak. Well, to me, a job interview, it's a two-directional affair, right?
Yes.
I mean, you are being interviewed by a potential employer, but at the same time, you're also interviewing your potential employer. So, of course, I, like many others in the similar circumstances, I was very nervous, but I also would like to see, you know, what kind of person was Najib Razak. And of course, I had my biases, right? Thinking, well, I don't know, he was the education minister, and perhaps, he might not be too kind to those of us who are not from the majority community and so on. But then during the question and answer, he asked me point blank, where did you go to school? Well, I thought he asked me, where did I go to university, right? So I answered, I went to University of California. He said, no, where did you go to your high school? So I thought, oh, wow, okay. I said, I went to in Malaysia, we call it a Chinese independent school, right?
Okay.
And I had to, I thought I should explain to him what was a Chinese independent school. But then, without missing a bit, immediately he asked me, oh, did you take the UEC? The UEC being the examination for the graduates of these Chinese independent schools. Well, I was very impressed. I thought, wow, he knew about the UEC and so on. He must be a very open-minded person, right? Then, of course, the conversation went very smoothly. He asked me how could we go ahead to be more inclusive in terms of the minority communities in Malaysia and so on. And I gave him some suggestions. And then I think about less than a month later, I received a letter of appointment.
So how many interviews do you get?
Well, I think including his, I
Yes.
think there were about 4 or 5 interviews, yeah.
So I guess the
Yeah.
million or billion dollar question is, what was it like working with Prime Minister Najib Razak and his cabinet?
Well, of course, Najib himself, he was economics graduate, and therefore it's a very economics oriented type of politician. He liked to, for example, look at various charts and graphs and various Excel sheets and so on. So that's almost like his hobby. He would even devote after dinner, supposed to be free time, to studying all these charts about how Malaysia is going to project forward in 5 or 10 years or so. I think he thoroughly enjoy this kind of very technocratic details. So, therefore, Malaysia under his leadership was a very economically oriented one, a very business friendly one, at least at that time.
Yeah. Do you feel a lot of pressure in that role, given, like you say, you're more of a minority race as well?
Of course, there was because you are not working for Najib alone, right?
Yes.
Najib himself, as I variously hinted, it's I think a very open-minded person with very little racial-oriented ways of thinking in his mind. Many of his best friends are Chinese, Indians, and so on. But well, you don't work in a vacuum, right? You don't work only with Najib.
Yeah.
You work with a wider groups of colleagues
Yeah.
and politicians, and sometimes they might not harbor, shall we say, very politely, the same way of thinking as Najib. Some of their thinkings could be more, shall we say, racially or religiously oriented, and so on. And being somebody who have lived overseas for many years of my life, and I felt rather uncomfortable sometimes in such a racially and religiously charged environment.
Not just in government, but in any place,
That's right, yeah.
For those of us who don't know,
Mm-hmm.
what does a political secretary to a prime minister actually do?
Well, by definition, a political secretary will assist the prime minister in, shall we say, settling political scores, to put it more bluntly. But of course, usually what it entails, it's, sometimes there will be political differences, for example, within the ruling coalition, between the government and the opposition, and so on. So you are, in a sense, the first line of defense. Namely, you should go forward in a, shall we say, subtle manner to try to settle these differences, to try to, shall we say, put out the fire before it sort of propagates and so on. And if that was not so successful, then of course it escalates up to your boss and so on. Yeah.
Oh, it's interesting.
Yeah.
It's actually more taking care of internal politics.
Oh yeah, you need to do a lot of internal political, settling a lot of internal political scores. For example, within the ruling coalitions, there are various, shall we say, component parties, right?
Right.
Sometimes they are not happy with one another. Then you must try to make them compromise, try to make them slightly happy, and so on. And then I have an advantage because I know a lot of opposition figures. I was very critical of the government and therefore was a friend of many opposition leaders. So, when they wanted to criticize my boss and so on, I would talk to them and say, okay, could we settle this in a slightly different way, right? Without you going out really to, blasting full fire and so on. Could we make a compromise, right? Could we settle this such that you would really have some benefits for your constituents, for example? Yeah.
Right. So there was a lot of mediation.
Yeah, indeed. Political works, by definition, it's the art of compromise or mediation and so on. Yeah.
Oh, very interesting. So what kind of, apart from this, do you have to also be like the gatekeeper for certain topics?
Oh yeah. Well, for example, I happen to be from East Malaysia, from Sabah, and as you might know, Sabah and Sarawak. I think even until today, they are the less, or some would say even least developed parts of Malaysia, right? So my compatriots from Sabah and Sarawak, naturally, they would have a lot of, complaints, aspirations, demands, and so on. So sometimes I wouldn't say you are the gatekeepers, you are the first line of problem solver, right? Sometimes their children could not get into the universities of their choice. Sometimes even if they're accepted by university, they're simply too poor to go to attend the universities and so on.
Yeah.
So sometimes we need to find some solutions for that. Or sometimes some parts of Sabah and Sarawak, they might not have good roads, adequate supply of clean water, stable supply of electricity, and so on. Well, then, of course, you cannot bring miracles, right?
Yeah.
But you try to find, let's say, some help from the corporate world and so on to see whether the situation could be improved a little bit. It's a jack of all trade, I
Yeah, I
would
was about
say.
to say it's a bit like a project manager.
That's
where-
right. That's right. And I learned a lot in the process, right?
Yeah.
Because before that, as I told you, I was always thinking of it will be all like America, everybody living happily, and then they get elected to the local councils and so on. It's not quite like that, because we are developing country, and in
Right.
a developing countries context, again, a lot of infrastructural challenges.
Right.
People don't have enough to eat, to clean water to drink, electricity to use, or even a network
Right.
coverage in order to facilitate their lives and so on.
So would you then say that each political secretary has their own different way and approach on how to solve things?
Oh yeah, of course. The prime minister, or at least Najib Razak, he had 4 political secretaries. I was one of them. The other 3 are mainly dealing with Malay politics, as you may say. Namely, they are from the UMNO party, the then ruling party,
Right.
and usually they try to deal with the internal politics of this UMNO party, which was then very, very strong. Yeah.
Wow. Okay, so it's actually very interesting.
Yeah.
What would you say are the biggest lessons that you learned as political secretary?
Well, I think politics very often it's about problem solving. It could be about settling ideological scores and so on, but I think that's more for developed countries. In the US, you have the Republicans who are more conservative. You have the liberals who are more, you have the Democrats who are more liberal, and they clash on the floors of the Senate or the House of Representatives over the ideological differences. They debate, mightily and so on.
Yeah.
But in developing countries, again, very often it's about clean water, about stable electricity, about some semblance of good roads and so on. Yeah.
So those were the biggest challenges
That's
for you in
right.
terms of how to solve the basic problems.
Indeed, yeah.
Right. So you were there for 2.5 years.
That's right. Uh-huh.
Why did you decide to leave?
Well, I think at some point, I think I had quite enough of it. I mean, solving all these problems, it's fun because you try to make a difference in people's very real life and livelihoods. But sometimes, again, working in such an environment which is very extremely racially charged and religiously charged. Again, you don't only work with Najib, you work with a lot of people, right? So, well, sometimes that becomes rather unbearable. But of course, in your official resignation letter, you will say, I would like to spend more time with my family and so on, right?
I get
I
it.
mean, you need to be very polite and so on.
No,
yeah.
I get it, but you
Yeah.
must have learned so much from that experience, right?
Indeed.
So, Isan, you were political secretary from 2009. And around that time, 1MDB was just being set up. From what you know, what was the original intention and vision of 1MDB, and what was the sentiment within the Malaysian political circle around that time?
Well, frankly speaking, I think 1MDB or One Malaysia Development Berhad, the original intention of setting it up was to supposedly perform certain activities which would benefit Malaysia as a whole, but which was perhaps politically sensitive. For example, I told you I went to a Chinese independent school, right?
Yes.
There were at that time around 60 of these Chinese independent schools in Malaysia. Typically, they produce very good students with very good results and so on. But the government doesn't recognize our certificates, the same UEC certificates which Najib mentioned during the interview. The government actually does not recognize that. And that means you could not work in the government and so on. And that also means you could not get government scholarship even if you are very good students, right? So I remember one of my tasks then
Yeah.
was to work with at that time, the new 1MDB, such that 1MDB would fork out some money to set up scholarships for these good performers in the UEC exams for them to study either domestically or overseas. Because previously, the government could not have done that, because if the government were to do that, that would be considered as tantamount to recognizing the UEC, and thereby, shall we say, the majority community in Malaysia, they would not be very happy about that. So it's a politically inexpedient thing to do.
Yeah.
So you have to do it in a roundabout way using 1MDB money and so on. Yeah. So I think for a few years, 1MDB was giving scholarships quietly to these, shall we say, good performing Chinese independent school graduates. Yeah. But I think
Right.
later on they did not do that anymore. So original intention was to do things like that, such that these students later on they could become very productive citizens, right? Instead of being extremely grumpy and angry about why I did so well and government didn't bother about me and so
Yeah.
on. So, but then of course from what I heard after I left, 1MDB evolved into something, shall we say, very different. Yeah.
Yeah, and also the
Yeah.
original intention was actually very
Noble, I would say,
Noble.
lofty even. Yeah.
Yeah.
But along the way, I don't know, somehow it became something else.
I know you left the government way before the whole 1MDB controversy broke out. But looking back, could you actually already see that Malaysia's system was too vulnerable?
Well, I think at that time, Malaysia had, shall we say, the same government for more than half a century. I think close to almost 60 years
Yeah.
or so. And sometimes some form of, shall we say, political and social hubris would engender. And sometimes then, of course, you don't have the check and balance
Yeah.
that would be vital to a healthy democracy. So, for example, the prime minister of the day would hold sway and had huge power and influence over most of the government. And it's very unusual for, shall we say, a junior official to question the prerogative of the prime minister and so on. And therefore, power sort of concentrates. Yeah.
From that chapter, what lessons do you think Malaysia has learned and hasn't learned?
Of course, it's important to be transparent about a lot of things.
Yeah.
Malaysia, I think since at least the 1980s or so, they have this Official Secrets Act.
Yeah.
I mean, having worked in government, I understand the importance. In fact, I took an oath to uphold the official secrets of the government, right? I think that's important because
Yeah.
you don't want your enemies to know your secrets, right? But very often it's very convenient to classify some of those, shall we say, inconvenient truths to be official secrets and hide it away from the public, and therefore shield those who benefited from those secrets from being disclosed and so on. So I think some sort of Sunshine Act, some sort of transparency will be very crucial, especially when it comes to financial dealings of the government of the day in Malaysia. I think the Malaysian government, it's sort of moving towards that direction. They passed laws about, for example, the government's budget could not have more than a certain percentage of deficits and so on. But I think it's not enough. You should have more transparency, and you should have less restrictions on freedom of expression, freedom of the press, and so on, such that the press could become the fourth pillar of check and balance against the excesses of the government of the day, right? And now, of course, you don't only have the press, yeah, or the media. You also have people like you and me,
Yeah.
who could do podcasts and so on. We are
Yes.
not exactly media,
Yeah.
but I think in our own separate ways, we also can play an active role. And I think that right has to be protected and not sort of harmed in any way.
To your point, I do
Yeah.
see podcasts as being an independent
That's right.
media, but used in a very smart and strategic way,
Yeah.
right? So, Isan, after that whole 1MDB chapter, Malaysia had another milestone in its history. In 2018,
Yes.
for the first time since Malaysia's independence from the British, the Barisan Nasional actually had a very big upset in Malaysia's general elections, right? Do you think that the 1MDB episode was a very key turning point for this to happen?
Oh yeah, the 1MDB, shall we say, series of scandals. They were, shall we say, the straws which broke the camel's back, and they were the catalyst for Malaysians to finally decide to change governments after, I think, nearly 6 decades, 60 years.
Yeah.
And but since then, of course, we changed governments very frequently. 2018, there was a change of government. 2020, 2 years later.
Yeah.
2021, the next year. And then 2022, the very next year. And now we have a government which lasts for already 3 years. So let's see how it goes. But I think this, shall we say, the growing pains of a nascent democracy.
Yeah.
Namely, as we move towards, again, what I call a true democracy with a healthy changes of government and so on. You do have this kind of growing pains because sometimes people would get too anxious, too ambitious in grabbing power.
So, Isa, how do you feel in 2018 when Dr. Mahathir Mohamad, at 92 years old, Malaysia's longest serving Prime Minister,
Yeah.
came back, led the opposition, won the elections? How do you feel?
Well, election night, and then there was next morning, right?
Yeah.
I was booked by a major international broadcaster for a 5 a.m. live interview, right?
Yeah.
Because of the time differences, they had to hit prime time back home, right? So I went there. It was a very tall building, sort of looking out to the Twin Towers in KL.
Yeah.
And then the TV anchor came about. I knew her for quite some time. She happened to be Malaysian, but working for this international broadcasting station. And we could not help but hug each other very tightly, and tears just streamed down. I remember she had to redo her makeup and so on because we could not help but hug each other and cry because what we had hoped over the past 6 decades finally came true. That Malaysia had a true and democratic transition of government. Yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
Is it as
We
much?
almost could not make it live, because she had to redo
Oh, wow.
makeup and so on. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean it's a really big and emotional thing
yeah,
to witness.
indeed, yeah.
Do you think it's as much about having the opposition come into power, or is it as much about someone like Dr. Mahathir actually being able to reunite?
Well, I think it's more about there is a healthy change of government and shall we say a non-violent change of government. You look at some other countries, they may have changes of government and sometimes quite frequent.
Yeah.
But they will involve the army going to the streets, tanks, sealing off some presidential palaces and so on, right?
Yes.
And that did not happen in Malaysia. The people, the armed forces, and the elite, they all accepted the changes very calmly. And in subsequent years, even though we have more frequent changes of
Yes.
government, but again, those were done very, very peacefully, without all these untoward incidents. Yeah.
Do you think in large part it was because it was Dr. Mahathir who was leading it?
Yeah, I think Dr. Mahathir was a familiar face. Well, I grew up during Dr. Mahathir's rule, right? He was
Yeah.
prime minister for more than 20 years. I remember 22 years, I think.
Yeah.
And well, as we grew up, it was only Dr. Mahathir as prime minister. And
Yeah.
of course, we did not like a lot of what he did, right? He was extremely autocratic. Well, I know him personally, so I hope he doesn't mind me saying that. Sometimes even dictatorial, right? But then he had a change of heart at some point, and he decided to lead the opposition. And of course, I think when people look at him, they thought, well, if Dr. Mahathir could make that change, why could I not, right? And
Yeah.
therefore, they also follow suit. Of course, since then, Dr. Mahathir, he again had some changes of heart, and sometimes now I think people would consider him to be more hardline nowadays. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So let's talk a bit about the current government in Malaysia under Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim. Where do you see under his leadership that Malaysia could be heading towards?
Well, Anwar is supposed to be a reformist or reformer, and that's how he campaigned over more than 2 decades, right? That it's gonna bring Malaysia towards greater heights by, shall we say, eradicating the corruptions, to make sure that the Malaysian governance system would be open and transparent, and so on. And well, I think he is trying very hard to do so. But at the same time, I think his main challenge would lie in the fact that not only, shall we say, politicians or Dr. Mahathir and so on had changes of heart, but the voters at large, or at least a majority of voters in Malaysia, they also had a change of heart. I think many of them changed from wanting the country to be more democratic to the wanting or desiring the country to be more conservative and, dare I say, religiously oriented. And that it's the main challenge for Anwar, because I think more and more voters, they want to see a country which is very conservative in its social outlook, which is extremely religious oriented in how it conducts itself,
Right.
and also sometimes even how it conducts itself internationally. So how do you square that
Correct.
with your traditional reformist supporters,
Yeah.
voters who simply want the country to be more democratic, less corrupt, and so on, but
Yes.
don't want the country to be more conservative. In fact, they want the country to be more liberal. They don't want the country to be more religious oriented. In fact, they want the country to be more open-minded, right?
Yeah.
So how do you square these two groups of people? How do you make sure that you still derive your ruling legitimacy, let's say, in the coming election? I think that remains his main challenge.
If there was one advice you could give to Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim, what would that be?
Well, sometimes you need to make hard choices and stick to them, right? You are either with your traditional or conventional support base, the reformists, the liberals, the more progressive, reformist oriented, or you want to go all out, abandoning these conventional supporters and go all out to woo all these very religiously conservative, supporters, potential supporters.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not easy, but it's a
Yeah.
choice
Yeah.
that you have to
Yeah,
make.
because if you try to straddle both sides,
Yeah.
sometimes you're so-called torn asunder.
True,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
you might not actually please either
That's right.
side
Yeah,
at all.
yeah.
Yeah, it's
You
very
might end up
interesting.
not pleasing either of them. Yeah.
Very interesting. If there was one thing that you wish more people need to know about Malaysia as a society, as a country, what would that be?
Well, Malaysia is a country in transition. Of course, it's a multiracial, multicultural society. Malaysia naturally it's extremely complicated and colorful. But as it evolves from previously, shall we say, a one-party state, right,
Yes.
ruled by a same coalition for more than 6 decades and so on, towards now wide open field, at least politically so, for all the politically ambitious to try to stake their claims and so on. In this process, you would see sometimes phenomenon which you like and sometimes which you don't like, right? You would see the more liberal minded, you would see the more conservative minded, you will see those who would like the country to be more secular, some who would like the country to be more religiously oriented and so on. And how do you then situate yourselves to make sure that on the one hand you will still have a voice in this country, and on the other hand, perhaps you still remain relevant politically in this country. So that's a huge challenge. But I think having traveled and work in different parts of the world
Yes.
and seeing other examples of this sort of multiracial, multicultural countries,
Yeah.
I think Malaysia is doing okay. I was in Rwanda last year, for example. Of course, in 1994, they had a huge, very despicable genocide and
Yes.
so on. But the country, Rwanda, they rebounded from there,
Yes.
and now it's one of the most promising countries in the whole of Africa,
Yes.
fast growing and so on. I was also last year happens to be in let's say Cyprus. I was there for a conference. And again, Cyprus is still divided between the Turkish-dominated north and the Greek-dominated south, right? And shall we say, the two communities, they don't like each other. There are civil wars, and then they divided the country into two. So if you look at all these examples, and there are places which I have not been yet, like Lebanon and so on. If you look at these examples where people would go to civil wars and genocides and other very, very nasty things
Yes.
because of their differences, Malaysia, it's very peaceful. And it's doing quite well, comparatively well economically as
Yes,
well, right?
yes.
Because it is it's no longer a tiger or a dragon of Asia, but still, if you talk about even high tech products and so on, Malaysia is still way up there. It's not easy to have such a situation. Yeah.
No, I think it's so amazing to see all these
Yeah.
countries bounce back.
Yeah,
I was also in Rwanda a couple of years ago, and it's amazing to see the resilience,
That's right.
and the tenacity of
Yeah.
the human race actually to
Yeah.
be able to bounce back. So, Isan, you're Malaysian. I'm Singaporean. Let's talk about Malaysia and Singapore. We have such a long history together. Do you see Malaysia and Singapore more as siblings or rivals?
Of course, we are siblings, and some would even call us twins. With our umbilical cords are still connected to one another,
Yeah.
right? Even physically, we are as such. You have the causeway, you have the second link, and so on.
Yeah.
And now, very soon, you will have the extension of I think they call it BRT or something, the LRT into Malaysia, right? So all this would link us inextricably together.
Yes.
There are, I think, many Malaysians who come into Singapore to work in many professional fields in Singapore. If you really ask them, your lawyers or your doctors, they will say, "Oh, I'm originally from Penang or
Yes.
Ipoh and or KL,
Yeah.
right?" So yeah, we are very well connected, and I'm also one of these products, right?
Yeah.
Because my mom is Singaporean. and she married my father, and she moved to Sabah. Yeah, and so from a very young age, almost every school holiday, every year, I would spend a substantial amount of time here in Singapore. So I also saw how Singapore developed from the early 1980s until now. Yeah, and I see these two countries. Sometimes we have differences, obviously, over water,
Yeah.
over sometimes all this airspace and sea territories and so on. And sometimes you might even quarrel very loudly against one another. But we actually have, shall we say, a set of procedures for not exactly resolving, but at least calming down these differences. Typically, you will see after a few weeks of Malaysia and Singapore quarreling over certain differences, let's say water supply and so on.
Yeah.
Then we will have our senior officials from both countries sitting down
Yes.
to discuss with one another. If they can settle the differences, then it's nice. If not, I like to use the word escalate. It would escalate up to, let's say, the ministers or the prime ministers meeting one another. If they can settle the differences, then it would be nice. If not, we are two very mature and legally minded countries or neighbors. We will submit the matters for adjudication by the International Court of Justice.
Right.
Yeah. And then just like, the case of Pedra Branca, Malaysia and Singapore both claim Pedra Branca to be the territories, right? We submitted it for adjudications and we abide by the rulings of the International Court of Justice. This is how the United Nations, where I used to work, envisions countries to resolve their differences, right? And we are the practicing good students of how the United Nations would like us to behave.
Yeah, no, it's very admirable actually.
Indeed,
right?
yeah.
So you would describe the current state of affairs as more as a complementation, collaboration rather than a competition, right?
Well, I think we are almost at the old time, the height in terms of best relations between the two countries. We are even trying to build like extension of subways into one another, right? That shows that it's incredibly
a lot of trust.
Trust and close and intimate and so on.
Yeah.
And also we have this Singapore, Johor, Singapore special economic zones, which is supposed to so-called prosper thy neighbor, right?
Yes.
It's going to help the economic development of Johor and by extension Singapore as well. So all this would not be possible without the two countries, seeing each other, looking at each other as, shall we say, twins. Yeah.
So, Isan, in which areas do you think Singapore and Malaysia can work more closely together and explore?
Well, I think we already work very closely with one another, not only economically, we trade extensively with one another, but even diplomatically, right? I would say, for example, Malaysia, Singapore, and Indonesia, the three of us are typically, shall we say, shaping or leading ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, diplomatic positions vis-a-vis the rest of the world. So, of course, then we can then join hands, Singapore and Malaysia, to try to explore more opportunities in other parts of the world as well. For example, I noticed that in recent years, both Singapore and Malaysia, we are eyeing both Africa as well as South America as both potential new markets as well as new growth regions and so on. Imagine if instead of we going in separately, we can join hands and then show them, like you see Malaysia, Singapore can work so closely together. Why can't you do the same?
Interesting.
So I think we it's high time that we try to undertake some of these joint projects overseas, perhaps in
Yeah.
Africa, perhaps in South America. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very interesting way
Yeah.
to look at it. It's almost like how two companies
Yeah.
can come together
Yeah.
to leverage each other's strengths.
That's right.
And show that, actually together they are stronger.
Indeed.
I am actually curious to learn from you. Do you think it's easier to run a smaller country like Singapore or a larger country like Malaysia?
Well, I think countries, big and small, they have their peculiar challenges, right? Running a bigger country, shall we say, like Malaysia, of course, you have more natural resources.
Yeah.
But because it is so diverse, sometimes it's really difficult to make sure that each and every corner of your country it's well taken care of, well developed, and so on. I mentioned, for example, in East Malaysia, we still need a lot of infrastructural development, despite our abundant resources, right? On the other hand, a country like Singapore, virtually, shall we put it very bluntly, no natural resources, right?
Yes.
But because you are small, therefore you can almost plan for each and every corner of your country to make sure this part is for that purpose and that part is for that purpose. They don't clash with one another
Yeah.
and so on. So you that's why Malaysia and Singapore, we are very natural, shall we say, complements of one another, right? Singapore could use more of Malaysia's natural and, shall we say, human resources. Malaysia could make use of more Singapore's planning and management and so-called anti-corruption efforts or experience and so on. So as some Singaporean friends told me, you go and rob and so on. You have no way to run in Singapore. It's an island, right?
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yes.
So well, but in Malaysia, yeah, you have a bigger ground to run and hide and place hide and seek and so on.
Yeah.
But is there a way so that you could also be tracked down? I mean, if you do something very horrible and so on. So yeah, all these are experiences we could share with one another. Yeah.
Let's talk a bit more about ASEAN. Right? Because ASEAN is the regional alliance that connects 10 Southeast Asian countries,
Yeah.
including Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand.
Yeah.
There are many investors, observers that are very optimistic about ASEAN as a region in terms of its growth outlook. From where you sit, what is the reality of ASEAN?
Well, ASEAN is officially the fastest growing, the most vibrant region of the world. And I think there are a lot of international statistics which testify to that. And that is by no means an easy accomplishment because, as you know, ASEAN consists of countries and peoples of different cultures, religions, and so on. In other parts of the world, when you have a situation like that, for example, the former Yugoslavia would come into mind. You have these small countries fighting one another, right?
Yeah.
But, except for recently some skirmishes, mostly ASEAN countries are peaceful towards one another. And we stress on economic development, right? Or at least that stretch of what I would call maritime ASEAN nations, Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand, Indonesia, Philippines, and most recently Vietnam.
Yes.
We have very outward-looking economies. We welcome foreign investments. We try to industrialize our nations. And sure enough, from the 1950s onwards, we progress very significantly such that even though we are not yet developed nations, with the exception of Singapore, but we are substantially there. We are almost there. That again, it's not an easy accomplishment.
Yeah.
So going forward, I think number one is to make sure that these societies, these countries do not so-called regress. For example, when we become very mature politically and socially. We
Yes.
must keep it that way. Huh? We must make sure that there will be no more regressing in terms of going back to autocratic rule and so on. So that's number one. Number two, I think this sort of linkages with the rest of the world,
Yeah.
with the United States, with China,
Yeah.
must continue, because if we simply close our door, well, we would only have a closed-door economy and a
Yeah.
very poor economy at that. But if we are linked, if we are part and parcel, if we become segments of these international supply chains, then well, that has proven to be very productive for our economy, and we must continue with that. So I don't think there's anything like substantially new that we should do.
Yeah.
It's more like what we have done well, we should try our best to preserve them. Yeah.
Let's look at the bigger picture, because now
Yeah.
there's continued and sustained China-US tensions. Do you think ASEAN can truly remain neutral?
I frankly don't think ASEAN, in case of some sort of very serious confrontations between the US and China, that ASEAN could still remain substantially neutral. But then, just as I said, politically, sometimes you must take sides, right, and stick to it. Well, you must take side as well, but you first must have very serious considerations as to which side that you would like to align with. At the end of the day, hopefully it would prevail. And number two, hopefully it would bring more good than harm to the region and by extension the world. I know this is a very general answer,
Yeah.
and it is deliberately so because, well, the more I observe international politics, frankly
Yeah.
speaking, it's difficult to say what is truly right and truly wrong, right?
Yes.
It's just that whether aligning yourself with one side or another could bring you more long-term benefits and hopefully security.
No, I absolutely agree, and I get what you say when you say that, it's a vague answer, but it's almost as if you're at the fork of the road.
Yeah.
You almost have to choose one or the
That's
other.
right,
It's
yeah.
not a right or wrong.
Yeah.
But it's just one that would take you this route or
Yeah.
that route, and you see how
Yeah,
it goes.
because again, if you try to ride on both horses, they are
Yeah.
going to pull you in different directions, and then it's going to be tearing you apart.
Yeah. So, Isan, I know that you actually spent quite a bit of time in the US. You studied in California. Help us to understand the American mindset when it comes to foreign policy.
I think you could perhaps sort of picture it that way. Huh? Or sometimes when you're in a family, you have quarrels and so on, right?
Yeah.
I would imagine if we were in California, if the couple, if they are quarreling very seriously and very vociferously, the neighbors, they are likely to call the police, and the police will knock on their door and ask them whether everything is okay, right?
Yeah.
But in the Asian context, if your neighbors are very loud in their quarrels and so on, you might not be happy, but typically you wouldn't call the police
Yeah.
to try to call on them, right?
Yeah. You actually say like, hey, don't disturb
Yeah,
them.
don't disturb them. It's
Yeah.
their internal, well, internal affairs, right? So,
Yeah.
so I think that categorizes the American way of thinking in terms of foreign policy. When they see that a certain region or even a country, it's not very democratic, it's trampling upon its own population and so on, they would, to put it bluntly, somehow interfere. And of course, the power that be in that particular region or nation would say, oh, this is foreign interference and so on, is not right. Hey, but you're trampling upon your populations, right? Without this foreign help, how is your population gonna spontaneously rise up and overthrow you. Is it your oppressive repression? Is it? I don't think that's possible. Just like during the American Revolution, the Americans were fighting against the British, right? It was with the French help. The French, you might say, interfere. It was with the French help that the Americans successfully sort of chased away the British and derived their independence. So that kind of mindset, it's very prevalent in the American way of thinking. Whereas in the Asian way of thinking, it's usually mutual non-interference. I don't interfere in your internal affairs. How you want to trample upon a population is your problem, not my problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also learning about that, right? In terms of the vast differences in mindset between the US and then China, which is Asian. How then can ASEAN balance between, the US and China?
Well, again, at the end of the day, I think to the extent that you continue to do business with both, right? For example, nowadays it's getting difficult to do business with the U.S. because of the high tariffs and so on. On the other hand, because of China's economy, at least for the moment, is not doing spectacularly well.
Yeah.
Well, it's again the amount of trade and investment also correspondingly decrease. So, well, that's why you need to go out there to explore new markets. That's why I say you need to go out there to Africa, to South America, and so on to try to open up the new frontiers and new markets.
If there was one piece of advice you could give to Southeast Asian leaders today, what would that be?
Well, I think they should, again, like their predecessors, focus more on economic development. I see in a number of Southeast Asian countries, they are engrossed in all this power struggle, who is going to be the new president or prime minister and so on. But let's say you become the new president. How are you going to really improve the livelihood of your populations, right?
Yeah.
I hope they really have a clue as to how to do it.
Into what matters rather than who's the person who's up there.
Yeah, indeed. Because we are, at the end of the day, still developing countries. We still need a lot of developments. And how could you do that in a very smart way, in a very sustainable way, and not simply, built very blindly and
Agree.
coded developments,
Yeah.
right? I think that it's a major challenge.
Yeah. Next question. Would you encourage a young person to go into politics?
Yeah, of course. But perhaps if a young person could have at least several years of, let's say, either professional or entrepreneurial career and development, then they could go into politics with more confidence. Because politics is, well, at least in my humble experience, not just, like you debating in your high school and your university, and you are the best debaters, therefore you plunge into politics and speak eloquently in parliament, right? It's not like that. You need to take care of the needs of your constituents and so on, and especially in the context of developing countries, especially that kind of requirements. So have a few years of experience under your belt before you go into politics. Yeah.
Okay, that's very good advice. Isan, if there was one law you could introduce in Malaysia to make it better, to make it more boleh, what would that be and why?
Well, in Malaysia, I think it's more about abolishing certain laws rather than having new laws enacted. For example, I think we should either abolish outright or at least substantially amend the Official Secrets Act such that unfortunate scandals such as the 1MDB would not recur again. we should also revisit some of our laws, which, in my humble opinion, restrict freedom of expression or freedom of the press, such that, again, if there are misdeeds and so on, it could be, or they could be reviewed. So all this, what we would call bad laws, if they could be repealed, or they could be substantially revised, I think it would be very good for Malaysia.
Okay.
Yeah.
Final and most important question is about food.
Okay.
I know you're a foodie.
Yeah.
I'm a foodie as well. So I'm going to list down 5 dishes that are available in both Singapore and Malaysia. And let me know which one you think is better in which country. Okay? Which country does it better?
Okay.
Okay? Ready?
Yeah.
Okay. Chicken rice.
I think Singapore does a better job in chicken rice. Yeah.
Okay. Agree?
Yeah. Because the rice is more fragrant, and the chickens, it's cooked. The timing for the chicken cooking sometimes is better.
Tender,
Yeah.
moist,
Yeah.
and still, juicy, right?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
More succulent.
Okay. From the level of details, I can tell you really enjoy your food. Next, bak kut teh.
Well, I tend to like the Klang style of bak kut teh, so I would say Malaysian, because the herbal fragrance, which is to my liking, I think is much prominent in the Malaysian version.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Third one, laksa.
Laksa, I will be extremely specific. I will go down to state level. I think Penang laksa
Yes.
is the best laksa among all laksas. Of course, that's going to upset a lot of my Johorian and Sarawakian friends. But still, I would dare say that because it has the right amount of, right mixture of sweetness, sourish, sort of tanginess, and so on. Yeah.
Okay. Number 4, prata.
Well, I'm not a big eater of roti prata in Malaysia. I think it's called roti canai. But in general, I think if it can be more fluffy, I would prefer that kind of
That one.
version. Yeah.
Okay, last one, char kway teow.
Again, good old Penang char kway teow, I think beats everywhere else in Malaysia as well as Singapore.
So I guess Malaysia won the food contest today. Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Isan. It was a very fun, insightful, and very detailed exploration of government and global affairs. So thank you very much, Isan, for your time and your insights today.
Well, thank you very much for having me on your show.
If this episode resonates with you, I would love for you to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need it today.